Proverbs chapter 1. We're going to start off verses 2 through 5 of Proverbs 1. It says, "To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance." These verses talk about to know, to understand, to receive, to increase in learning, to obtain guidance, all of these things. I don't know any of these things that anyone doesn't desire. I think all of us want to understand. All of us want to know. All of us want to increase in learning, to receive instruction. All of us want those things, but the road to get there is not always clear, and it's never easy. Eve thought she could take a shortcut to get there. If you'll recall the things that happened in the garden, and that fruit that's referred to as the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the fruit of knowledge. And remember, she had been pretty good at withstanding temptation up to the point that Satan suggested that this was going to make her wise like God. And the text says that when she saw that it was a delight to the eyes and good for food, and that it was desirable to make one wise, she did take and eat. She was looking for a shortcut to wisdom, and it only made the path more difficult, actually. And in fact, it made the path more difficult for all of us, is what the Bible demonstrates to us. Proverbs chapter 1, this chapter offers some guidance on how to know, on how to understand, on how to receive, on how to increase, on how to obtain guidance. And we want to talk about those things this morning just a little bit. Look at verse 7 of Proverbs 1. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." The word that is translated fear there is a word that could be translated with any of a number of English words: reverence, respect, veneration, deference, consideration. All of those words would work. We could insert any of them in, and in fact, I think it might be a worthwhile exercise to do that. So let's read Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7 and substitute some of these other words in there. The reverence of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Or the respect of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The veneration of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The deference of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The consideration of the Lord, that's the simplest one probably for us to get a handle on. Just considering God. The consideration of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If we really want to know, if we really want to understand, if we really want to receive instruction, if we really want to increase in learning, if we really want to obtain guidance, it starts with respecting God. It starts with considering God and considering the word that God has spoken to us, and the deference that we ought to give that word. It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's also an interesting word I want to talk about for a moment, because that could be translated start, or it could be translated birth. I actually like the imagery of that. the fear or the reverence or the respect for God is the birth of knowledge. It could be inception. It could be origin. I think that's a great word. The fear of the Lord is the origin of knowledge. That's where it begins. That's where it comes from. The fear of the Lord is the seed of knowledge. That one even has some biblical support. If you recall from Luke chapter 8, where the word of God is compared there in the parable of the sower to seed, which is scattered. That's what this is talking about. The fear of the Lord and the deference given to the teachings of God is the seed of knowledge. It's where knowledge comes from. If we ever want knowledge, we have to first honor God. That's the point of this verse. That's the point of the psalmist when he says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. When I refuse to acknowledge God, when I refuse to respect him as God, when I refuse to listen to him as my creator, it is a foregone conclusion that I will never have true knowledge. We have to first honor God, and that's why the Decalogue's first 3 commandments actually center around this very principle. First 3 commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. That is simply respecting and acknowledging God. That's what that's all about. You shall have no other gods before me. And then he said, you shall not make a carved image. That's a replacement for him. And by the way, when you get to the New Testament, that idea is extended to not necessarily even require a physical carving, but simply an allegiance of the heart that is given to something. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a carved image, and you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That's, again, all about respecting God. The reason that you don't use his name flippantly is because of the deference that you are showing him, of the respect that you have for him, of the fear that you have for God. That is where everything good starts, respecting God. And it's one of the reasons why that there are problems in the world today is because there is a lack of respect for God. And in fact, for a lot of people, there is a great effort that is exercised to extract any respect from God that they have residual in their hearts away from them, and to prove to others that they are not under the thumb of God, if you will. Which is why they mock religion, why they mock the Bible, why they accuse those who are believers of lacking understanding and knowledge and intelligence. They're seeking to remove from their own minds and hearts any residual respect of God that's there. And the result, well, we can see it play out in the world around us, the wickedness that is prevalent, and the lack of understanding about the nature of man and the nature of God and the relationship that we share to God and the value of certain things. And don't think that just applies to the world, because what the world is thinking and preaching, well, it comes into our minds and affects our thinking as well. And so even among people who claim to be believers in God, you'll hear more and more, I'm spiritual but not religious. Because this lack of respect for the practices of God and the worship of God is becoming to even among some believers to be something that is influencing their mindset. We're never going to have understanding. We're never going to have wisdom unless we first respect God. Look at the very next verse, verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. I think that there is a place for this to reside as a literal reading, but I don't think that it's intended to be a purely literal reading. I think that we are being encouraged to respect all those that are empowered by God to teach us. And that starts with parents. That's where it begins in life. But then it expands and involves some other people as well. And the fact of the matter is, what I need to do is, regarding those who are wiser, who are more knowledgeable, who are more experienced, and who are ordained by God, that I need to properly consider them as well. That's why we're told to respect our elders. And that's a more general statement than to respect father and mother, which we're also told to do, to honor father and mother. But we have to be the kind of people that also understand that there are folks out there who have been influenced by the wisdom of God, who have been taught and trained by the doctrines of God, and who have been empowered by God to teach and instruct. And that expands in a lot of different ways. That's not only parents, but it can be those who serve as overseers in local congregations. To a small extent and in a small way, the governing authorities play that role. They have a purpose. They've been empowered by God. We need to honor that and respect that and understand it. But this is one of those things that actually has a couple of caveats to it. The Bible itself places these caveats on this idea of respecting those and hearing my father. What if my father instructs me in a way that's wrong? Well, there's an answer for that. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1, Paul wrote, by the way, I think that the apostles can be placed in there as those, the prophets, as those who were empowered by God to teach and instruct us. He wrote, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Not just imitators of him in every respect or in any way, because if I'm going to imitate everything that Paul did, then I also need to persecute Christians, seek their death, and do it all with a clear conscience, because he had all of those things. But when he was doing those things, he was not imitating Christ. And so the caveat is, be imitators of me as I am of Christ, inasmuch as I am influenced by him and the fear of him. And the way that is explained in Acts chapter 5 and verse 29 with regard to the governing authorities, for instance, we must obey God rather than men. And so, yes, there is a deference and a respect that we need to recognize for those who have been empowered by God to teach and instruct us and have been taught themselves by God. There's also a limit that's placed on that says no man is to be honored as God is honored. They are only to be respected inasmuch as they already honor God, which again is where we started and where everything starts. The fear of the Lord is the beginning. And then connected to that, listen to your father and your mother. Listen to their discipline and instruction. Any divergence from God's counsel, however, men need to be challenged on. Listen to what he says in verses 10 through 19 of this context. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason, like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, and we will all have one person. So he's describing these people who are encouraging you to do things that are evil and that are wrong for some good that you might gain from it. Let us do evil to these people so that we can increase. in these precious goods, he says, my son, do not walk in the way with them. So after he has said, listen to the instruction, he then says, but if it's an enticement of sinners, don't walk in that path. Don't consent to that. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. What if your father and your mother are those sinners that are enticing you to do evil? It happens in the world. Does this apply to them? Yes. Because this caveat applies to all men. In vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Don't fall prey to that. So the task of discerning godly counsel from ungodly enticement is born here in Proverbs chapter 1. Listen to this instruction, but don't be enticed by this one. Now we got to figure out which one is from God and which one is not. And in order to do this, we have to go back to number one. We have to respect God ourselves. That's why we don't follow a human leader to the exclusion of God. That's why no man is put in that place. That is why no position is the head. Christ alone is the head. Emperors don't rise to the level of God. Popes don't rise to the level of God. No religious leader rises to the level of God. And yes, parents, not even we rise to the level of God. None of us do. Acts chapter 17, verse 11. They received the word eagerly, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things are so. That is the process, the task of discerning godly counsel and instruction from the enticement to evil. That lies on me. If I would have wisdom, if I would obtain knowledge and understanding, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to actively respect those that are empowered by God to teach wisdom, but constantly check it against the wisdom of God. And only accept that counsel that is actually from God, because that's where it lies. And that's where another important principle comes. Well, then why do we even have that middle part in there? Why does he say, listen to your fathers and mothers? Or if we're going to expand this to other folks? Well, because as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. It's not good that a man should be alone. We're not singular individual creatures. The eunuch was reading the word of God from Isaiah the prophet, and he had no idea what it was talking about. And Philip was sent to him, and Philip said, do you understand what you read? And he says, well, how can I unless someone explains it to me? He understood he needed some guidance, some counseling from someone who had already been trained by these things. He says of the prophet, when he writes this, is he speaking of himself or of someone else? And Philip, starting with that verse, it says, preach to him Jesus. That's the way it works, and it's required that happens. That's why that step's in there. But it's a step that cannot be accepted without warning and without caveat that even the greatest among us are prone to mistakes, and so everything is checked against God. And only that counsel that comes from God matters. Lastly, we want to notice that we need to receive the wisdom that's been presented to us. If we would obtain knowledge and understanding and all of these things that we're talking about, we have to receive the wisdom that has been presented. Look at verses 20 and 21. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. Obviously, this is figurative language. This is wisdom personified as a lady. But the point is pretty clear, at least I think it is. Wisdom's manifested to us and is freely available. It's in the street. It's in the marketplaces. It's at the city gates. It's not somewhere hidden. You don't have to go look for it. You don't have to dig a hole or knock on a door with a secret knock and offer a secret handshake to get in and find it. There's a whole nother story about that. There are, in fact, societies out there that will suggest to you that they're actually the keepers of all the real wisdom. And if you really want to be in the know, then you got to be a part of us, and we're going to teach you how to, and we're going to degree you out and bring you to this knowledge only when you're ready. And we're the only ones that really have it. And by the way, here's our secret handshake and how you know. No, that's not the way wisdom works. Wisdom's out there in the streets, in the marketplaces, at the city gates, available to every single individual. And not only that, he tells us in this chapter that wisdom is guaranteed. Listen to this. Verse 23. If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Now, it's a conditional clause. If you turn. But the guarantee is that if you do that, wisdom will be yours. And it's important that we're aware of that. Each of us can have all the wisdom that we need if we'll listen. It's out there crying at us from the city gates, in the streets, in the marketplaces, but we have to listen. This isn't a promise of equality. It's not a promise of equality of ability or of opportunity. It never says that. It never says that everyone is going to be equally able. It never says that anyone is going to have exactly the same opportunity. It is a promise that wisdom and salvation are available to every one of us, whether those things are available to us or not. Whether or not we're of equal ability, whether or not we're of equal opportunity, whether or not we're of equal status or standing or place or position. I hope that everyone in this room realizes how blessed we are, the fact that we are living in this place. But listen, there is not a place on this earth where the wisdom which comes from God is not readily available to anyone who wants it, no matter what place they live, no matter what their circumstances. If you turn at my reproof, I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. That last part of it's not conditional at all. I will do this. It's not conditional. See, we're warned of the consequences of not receiving wisdom. Wisdom's out there, and we're warned of the consequences of not. Listen, verses 24 through 26 of the first chapter of Proverbs. Because I have called you and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one is heeded. Because you have ignored all of my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. And I want you to know that I'm convinced that the I of this context is wisdom, not God. This is wisdom that's calling out to us. And that's important because of this. Ezekiel 33 and verse 11 says, as I live, declares the Lord, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from his way and live. Turn back from your way. God doesn't mock when judgment comes upon anyone. God doesn't enjoy the loss of any soul. But I'm going to tell you something. Wisdom that is available to each one of us will stand mocking at us on the day of judgment when we're judged because we refuse to listen. That will stand as a mocking testimony against us. We will have no excuse. because wisdom was there. It just had to be heeded. It had to be listened to. So don't wait, because wisdom is helpful only in time. Wisdom is out calling in the streets saying, "How long, O naive one, will you remain naive?" But it is only in time. After time ceases, wisdom has no more power. Listen to what he says. Verse 27 and following. When terror strikes you like a storm, and calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. See, at that point in time, there's no more power of wisdom to respond. It doesn't do any good. They will call on me then, but it's too late at that point. I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. This is repeated in Romans chapter 1. This is repeated in the discussion of the disciple Judas, of whom it is said he went to his own place. That is an expression that means exactly the same thing as they shall eat the fruit of their way. So the warning is there. Don't wait. Wisdom is shouting at the streets today. Listen. Turn. Let yourself be taught. I will pour out my spirit upon you. I will make my words known to you. That's the promise. We'll only listen to wisdom. We shall have wisdom. And of course, we have to remind ourselves again that it all begins with the respect of God, with the deference being given to God's instructions. That is where it all begins. That's where it's born. And today is the day to begin the process. Now is the time to embrace God and His wisdom, not later. And it doesn't matter if we're 12 or if we're 92. Well, I'll do it this way. It doesn't matter if we're 15 or we're 95. It doesn't matter. Now's the time to embrace wisdom. Now's the time it can help you. Now's the time that you can know and you can benefit. You can obtain and you can grow. Jesus grew while He was on this earth in stature and in favor with God and with men. Luke chapter 2 tells us. We can too. But we can only do it now. Because when time is no more, wisdom's just going to stand there as a mocking testimony against us, having been available to us for the entire time that we were here. And our having turned our back on it, He says, you will eat the fruit of your way. Verses 32 and 33. I believe that's the last two verses of the chapter, if I'm not mistaken. The simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. I am empowered and you are empowered. Each one of us are empowered to do the right thing. And as it relates to each one of us, we are the only one so empowered. No one can obtain knowledge for you. No one can obtain understanding for you. No one can fear God for you. No one can will it or wish it or hope for it for you. My son, that's an application. My son, listen to the instruction. Application of every individual. We are the ones that decide whether or not we listen, whether or not we learn, whether or not we turn and receive the blessings, or whether we refuse. So I submit to you to decide for yourself what you're going to do with the wisdom of God. It has been made known, it has been spoken, it has been proclaimed publicly, it has been recorded, it has been preserved, it continues to be proclaimed by the faithful. I have to decide what I'm going to do with it. Paul actually wrote about that in terms of the ones who were doing the preaching as well, didn't he? We're going to keep in mind that Paul was an apostle of Christ. He was a prophet of God. He was a preacher of the gospel. And he said that he had to watch himself and he had to discipline himself, lest after he preached to others, he himself might be disqualified. It applies even to those who teach wisdom. That if we don't heed it ourselves, learn from it ourselves, and turn ourselves, even we might be disqualified. We're the only ones empowered to do this for ourselves. And so the invitation that is appropriate at this or any other assembly such as this is that if we can help you receive the benefits of wisdom, then we offer ourselves in service to you for that need. We offer ourselves to help you, to encourage you, to strengthen you, to teach you what we know, to help you in your obedience to the things that you already know to do. And that's all that we can do, is to be at your service in your quest to turn and receive the wisdom of God that you have been promised. And if we can help you this morning, there's something that we can do for you. If you need our prayers, if you need our encouragement, if you need to be obedient to the call of repentance and baptism, we stand ready to be at your service. If you let it be known as we stand and sing.